computer. Paul,
Hey, Scott.
thank you so much for talking to me today. Um, Today we're going to be talking about code reviews. Paul is a mentor of mine, a friend, a coworker, one of the best engineers I know. Um, I'm really excited to interview you today. I know that was a super brief intro, so if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah. So we work together at Gitlab, and I've been there for 3 years now. Um, and I've been doing software engineering for a while. Um, you and I both do jujitsu too, not together
Yeah.
because there's some distance there, but um, so always enjoy talking with you, Scott, because we usually have a lot of similarities and differences that challenge each other, but also encourage each other. So it's always good talking with you.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. I'm really excited to talk to you about today. A lot of what I feel like a lot of your time spent at GitLab is reviewing code. I know you have a lot of thoughts on the process. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how to become a better code reviewer, the mindsets going into code reviews, etc. But personal stuff, want to start with how you got into programming and just
Oh, good question. Man, such a good question. I have early memories of sitting with my brother, huddled around a computer, playing some like old school MS-DOS adventure games or whatever. And we would play those games and then we would go and pretend. Then we'd leave and like we'd pretend we're in the game. And like so we play Monkey Island and my brother would be Guybrush Threepwood and we it was so impactful for us because it just felt like we were, in the 8-bit world. It felt like we were there. And our imagination sparked. We would create stories about it, but we always wanted to create our own game. Like that was always the dream. And so my dad, he wasn't a computer professional, but he just kind of had computers and stuff as a hobby. And he taught us a little bit of like, got us a big book of like, learn C++, 30 days. And like, so my brother and I was like 7 and we're trying to go through the book and just absolutely blowing my little mind. But ever since I was a kid, hacking around at computers has always been the thing. And it wasn't until I was in university, I didn't realize I could do this professionally. And when I took a computer science class, I was like, oh man, this is what I should have majored in. But because hacking around computers was always the thing, I got hired as a business reporting analyst when I was in university,
Mhm.
studying to get my business degree, and realized a lot of stuff we were doing we could automate with computers. And so put a lot of effort in here. I'm just a teenager of like, hey, let's automate these reports we're creating. And so, learn a lot about, unfortunately, learned a lot about Excel and VBA for doing that. Um, but we were kind of doing some rogue, very rudimentary software engineering, which I didn't realize was what I would call it at that time. But then a friend of mine hooked me up with a job that was actually, this is going to be my first actual software engineering gig. And it was a really small company. So we had all the freedom to make all the mistakes and learn all the things the hard way. And I've been having a blast ever since. So software engineering is something I do for fun. But it's also something I feel incredibly privileged to do as a job because I have so much fun doing it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Let's backtrack a little bit. So you didn't study computer science? You realized
I was getting a minor in math
okay.
and I had to take a computer science class. And I was like, oh gosh, I wish I just spent my whole time doing this.
Mhm.
So I switched to get a minor in computer science.
Cool.
I went back to get a master's in software engineering. So I have a
Oh,
master's in
cool.
software engineering. When I was working at a different company, I was working and taking classes in the evening and the weekend. And that was really interesting. So I feel grateful too, having gone through academia, because there's some really sweet nuggets there. There's a whole lot of challenges that teach you things indirectly because
Right.
academia can be quite different than industry.
That's really interesting. I don't, there's very few people that I've met that are practicing software engineers that have a master's in computer science. Do you feel like is that something you recommend to people that are thoroughly interested in the field, or are you kind of like, you don't really need to?
So it's really a question. And so to clarify, my master's is in software engineering, which is
Okay,
different
sorry.
than computer science.
Yeah,
Computer science, you're probably going to do some really heady algorithms and
got it.
data structures and all sorts of stuff like that. Software engineering was interesting. And the skills that I took away from it, I didn't realize were going to be so applicable to GitLab, because a lot of the classes were like, let's analyze the coupling and cohesion of
Wow.
this, and let's write papers about it. And like,
Wow.
so it was a step towards, you know, almost doing the PhD work of like, sometimes we're going to look at metrics for like,
Right.
how can we, with metrics, analyze the complexity of a function, or and then even like some advanced testing like perspectives. So
Wow.
software engineering was very practical, and it gave me a lot of like, wow, here's the industry standard term for this gut feeling we all have of this is bad code, but why?
Right, right, right.
So that was really cool. So I personally, because of the way I'm bent, I would have liked to do computer science. Like doing all those heady problems would have been neat. But software engineering, I gleaned a lot from it, because I mean, we practiced waterfall in the class. So the class, like we learned about agile, but we did this one long project which was very waterfall like, and it just gave me so much context to the history of our industry, how timeless some of the things we talk about are,
Sure.
even though technology keeps changing. Um, so it was really good for me, but I was in a position where like my company was going to be paying for it. And like,
Cool.
it was a special, program that wasn't, like it was only on the weekends. It was for professionals. And so there's a cost to doing it. Like
Sure. Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's a requirement, but I did gain a lot, but it did also take me distilling what the professor was saying into knowing how I could do this in my day to day. There's a lot of people I went to school with that weren't professional software engineers, were trying to be professional software engineers. And since they weren't practicing software engineering every day, it was hard for them to draw the line between, hey, this is what's taught at school, this is how it's going to actually play out in industry. That part was definitely missing. I was great. I'm glad I was in the role, and then I got to really dive deep into some of those subjects and had the context. That context was missing, I think, personally, for some people. So
awesome. Cool. Yeah. Sorry for that.
No,
that's really interesting.
I will say I don't think I would have gotten the job at GitLab unless I had that on my resume, because my previous degree was in business, so my resume didn't. Part of doing it was like, hey, I know I need to get some sort of official thing here.
Interesting. And so I'm just drawing. We haven't had this discussion before, so now I'm just drawing timeline with you. So software engineering, you had college software engineering job that your friend got you while doing this master's program, then GitLab, or was there something in between?
Yeah, so then I moved to a government contractor, and that was the company that had like tuition reimbursement stuff. And,
cool. Awesome.
That was such interesting experience too. This night and day to how GitLab does work. And
awesome.
But what's interesting is that's our customers at GitLab. So it was really cool getting that experience, because that's the world that some of the biggest customers for enterprise software live in, and realizing the challenges that they have has really helped me out too. It's
awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool. I knew we were going to digress.
Nothing to do with code review, but
yeah, nothing, like absolutely nothing. But I think this is so interesting. But let's get into it. So code review is a really interesting thing. And I think from an individual perspective, being the reviewer and reviewee, you can learn so much in that experience about the code base, your style, other people's style, context, or you can learn absolutely nothing and just do what's told and hit buttons and move it through. And when we started working together and getting reviews by you, every time it was challenging my thought, challenging my approach. We would make it better, not only about the code, but how we would interact with each other. So just open-ended question, why are code reviews important from either a seasoned professional's perspective or even someone that's watching this that like has never had to go through a code review, but they hear this thing and they're like, I want to get a job, you know?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's a little bit of there's a lot of assumptions made in the question because code reviews could probably going to look different across organizations. And so um, I'm going to slightly rephrase your question to what
Cool.
problems does code review attempt to solve?
Perfect.
And we hopefully have all experienced, if you've done software engineering, even like just for a very short period of time, something may make sense to you and you've tested it out and it makes sense, but you missed something, or you didn't test this edge case, or maybe it works, but none of the code or the variables actually make sense to anyone other than you. And if you're working in a small team and maybe you're the only person that ever touches it, that other person than you sometimes is you a year later. You look back and you're like, what in the world is going on? So we as software engineers need to really value the perspective people that did not touch the code that they have. The goal of software engineering is, you have problem reduction. We try to take a really complex problem, break it down to simple chunks, simple problems. But then the implementation also, we need to really value very, very simple implementation. So a great software engineer isn't, whipping out complex one-liners and all sorts of stuff. They're thinking about, I want to do this. It depends on your constraints, but most of the time, especially with web development, it's about, and is myself a year from now going to be able to understand what's happening? Is someone else on my team going to be able to easily pick this up? So code review is huge at that. At one, catching something that I wasn't aware of, but then two, just giving that whole other perspective that's outside of myself, because there is bias, and hopefully the more you do it, the more you realize I just keep wrestling with myself. Like I'm wrestling with that bias, and I really value someone else's opinion. So sometimes code review is, in some organizations, it's just, hey, this looks like code, check, merge. And that's not necessarily solving the problem. So I'd say the main problems to address are getting a second pair of eyes to break the bias of it makes sense to me, but doesn't make sense outside of me. And then also the second pair of eyes of that may be connected to other contexts that I wasn't aware of or something. Those are the problems I think that code review is trying to address. And so it's pretty critical. And I think you can tell when organizations that don't practice it in a large team, it depends. Like if you're in a really small organization, you have significantly senior engineers and like no one else is really touching it. Like they could probably get by a lot without doing code review. But once your team starts to grow, then what really makes sense, and I would say extremely senior engineers are probably the worst at it. What really makes sense to an extremely senior engineer may not make any sense to a more junior engineer or just even another senior engineer. So it's once the organization has to change, and it will change, you're going to wish we had more eyes on it. And that's where code review is, this asynchronous process of getting more eyes on it. There's other ways of doing that, like pair programming, where we're synchronously getting more eyes on it.
Right.
But code review, you can get a lot of parallelization of your through your operations because it's asynchronous.
Awesome. Yeah, you made a really interesting point. Reviewing code and code review, there's like you kind of alluded to a distinction, right? Where it's, if I'm reviewing something that you did, there's the changes on the page in the diff that are like, these are the things that changed in terms of implementation. But how does that fit in, right? That's like just reviewing the code. But how does that fit into the larger picture of, does this make sense deconstructing the issue? What's the long-term goal? How does that fit in? Right.
Yeah, it's a huge deal. And I think where code review is powerful is the way organizations hold information.
Mm,
GitLab has a humongous handbook that we use as a reference, but not everybody knows all the handbook because it's just too much information.
right.
And lots of organizations probably similar. We have a humongous stack of requirement stock. But in reality, information is held by individuals, and it's a network of individuals that hold the information. And the chance that I know that this bit is going to be relevant to what I'm doing, uh, I would just depending on how well and how much information there is, it's not going to be as strong as the chance that both of us,
Right.
two eyes on the problem, know that this bit is relevant.
Right.
And just because of the way, and code reviews need that. If you do actually random code review where, hey, I have something and someone that has no context in this is going to look at this, that's really valuable because now that person has no context sees, oh, here's something else that's going on in our product or in our application. And that adds to this network. And so hopefully you want to have any bit of information is just maybe 2 or 3 nodes away.
Right.
That's so powerful in code review is what you said isn't just we're reviewing the lines of code, but also looking at the whole picture, and everybody's going to have a different perspective on that picture. It helps significantly helps change it so that we don't run into user facing problems and we're able to make things faster in the future.
Awesome. Do you have when you go into a code review, do you have a personal checklist that is like this is the standard that I like to go into, or do you have things you think about that kind of qualifies as if I do these things, then this becomes a good code review?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I and we at GitLab are in the middle of merging glorious reviewing documentation alluding to this. But I personally view and so in GitLab we call it merge requests, and GitHub it's pull requests. If there's a net profit, I want to merge. So there's an anti-pattern with code review of like, we want to try it, we want to get this perfect, and we're just going to keep bike shedding something or whatever. And if there's a net profit with the change, we want to merge because code review is really the code review process is really sweet when there's not this apprehension to like, oh no, I got to go through another whole review process because it takes forever. Like,
right.
If you can make the MR cycle fast, that's great. So as soon as there's a net profit, we're good to go. And some things that play into that are there's some like permission to play lines of like, if we cause any user facing issues, like we got to fix it. If we don't have tests, like we can't merge it. It's a non-starter. If, and different organizations are probably gonna have different permission to plays for a merge request. But for me, I'm really thinking about the user. And so and we do front end engineering, so I'll test things manually, and that's usually where I start. Because if there's user facing issues, that might significantly change the process. But I kind of short circuit a little bit where I'll look at the code and I'll say like, this seems weird. Let me see if I can find a bug for it. Like I'll look at the code and I'll be like, I think we're overlooking something here. Let me see if I can find a user facing bug for it. And I'll time box myself so I'm not spending a lot of time, but I'm really on the eye, keeping the eye out for user facing issues. And then it's about, can we make changes to this? And because I've been doing software engineering for a while, I do have a gut feel for like, hey, we're breaking some solid patterns, which implies it's hard to make changes and like all of that stuff. But then we're really interested in, is what we introduce fragile? Like, are we going to overlook something? Are we going to in the future break the user experience or something? So those like permission to plays are probably like the first thing.
Okay.
And then I'm looking through the code, looking for what could potentially cause a user-facing issue. And then I'm looking through the code of what could potentially cause a future user-facing issue if we overlooked something because the code was fragile or something like that. And yeah, but I've also, It's a good question, because I think there's a lot going on inside of my head that I'm not aware of too, because I've seen a lot of code. So it's
You brought up so many good points. I don't know where to start.
dude, this is like this is a I have a love affair with code review. Like, this is, I could just go on and on, but um let me highlight why I really, really like it.
Okay.
Sorry, I don't mean to.
No,
He's
go.
going, man.
No. I want you to talk. I don't want to talk.
When I first joined GitLab, our code review process really took me by surprise. I was not familiar with working like that, and I was familiar with quickly merging things to master or dev or whatever, and it was surprising how much friction it felt like there was there. I had some really poor code review experiences where, like, some reviewers were just like, hey, I did something. I explained why and why it was a little different. And then the reviewer, like, maybe didn't read that and was just like, we don't do it this way, change it. And man, that just, like, took away a whole lot of enthusiasm for for what I was doing. And so some of that generated where, when we do code review asynchronously, we have to communicate a lot of the intent with that asynchronous communication. So with lots, I kind of developed this labeling system for comments, which I then coined conventional comments. And that has been a really huge game changer for me personally, because of the strict amount of labels I can add. It's either a suggestion, a question, or whatever, and I can then say it's blocking or non-blocking. But the labels I've chosen I was really intentional with the naming of the labels, because I feel strongly that when we engage in a conversation, I need to assume that you know something I don't know. If that element isn't there in code review, you're going to waste so much time in back and forth MR cycles, because the reviewer, rather than asking like, oh, this is different, why did we do it this way? The reviewer just like, this is different, you're wrong, do it this way. And now we're combating, and it's going to take like 3 or 4 cycles before we finally resolve it. And someone just feels, everyone feels horrible about it.
Right.
And now you've moved on. No one feels better. But if you just rephrase it to a question or suggestion, or even if I didn't get a chance to read why, like, just rephrasing the intent to, I know that there's something, you have context I don't have. Have you thought about this context? And both parties have to be really receptive to that.
Right.
And there's another element of code review which has made me really fall in love with it. But when that happens, what I find so neat isn't that single review, but both parties involved had this positive collaborative experience, and we both took away something from it. And so now it's like this exponential benefit when we take the time to look at code review and have positive collaborative interactions. We've both invested in each other. And then when I do another code review, I'm going to invest in the person that we're doing there. And so it really helps boost all of our team to, what are the standards we're trying to hold? And also, what are the patterns we may not be aware of? And but there's a huge opportunity for return on investment with code review, is what I've noticed, which is why it's really sweet. I also love looking at code. I love looking at other people's code, because they do it so differently than I would. And I appreciate continuously seeing different.
It's like art. It's like
100%.
Or like an expression, becomes an expression of self, right? But like code is your medium, not paint or drawing.
Yeah, 100%.
That's really interesting. What I find to be the most difficult thing, and I want to know how you mitigate this, is as a software engineer, part of your job is to code review. That's an expectation, but it's it's indirectly a deliverable because you're helping other people deliver. So when you're this thorough, or as thorough as you are, do you set limits on your daily code review? Because polling a lot of people, you made a great point. Pull down the code and test it. See if you can find any bugs. Be a consumer of the thing. A lot of people don't do that because it takes time. So how do you balance the your day or limit of code reviews to be this thorough? Because I feel like a lot of people just get bombarded and then they just do the thing where it's like it's always net profitable in using your term, just like let's go, like let's keep pushing it through.
Yeah, it's you have to be aware of what's profitable. You can't and it takes time to get that balance, but you always have to be aware of like, okay, is an extra 5 minutes I spend here, is that going to be profitable or not?
Right.
So I found much success with time boxing my code reviews of like, depending on the code review, like if I'm spending more than 30 minutes, I need to probably, rather than trying to find issues, I need to ask questions. Like I need to, this is concerning. Have we considered this? I try to do as much as I can to cut down on MR cycles. So I do take a lot of, I do try to do a lot of for the code reviews so that it's so easy for the reviewer to consume. Oh, these are the next changes and we're good to go.
Right.
I do try to do a lot to cut down on MR cycles. And I've personally justified because I've seen it play out to where that little bit of time, yeah, it may have taken from my day and caused a delay on this MR, but the future MRs were now better because of it. And I've personally seen that play out of contributors that weren't aware of the big context, made some really quick breaking changes that broke things they weren't aware of. I'm going to take the time. We're going to show, here's what happened. Here's some suggestions for how we could have done it differently. And if you do it right, and if the contributor is receptive to feedback, like their next MR is going to be, they're going to realize this other context. And it's all about that information sharing. And that's huge. And that has I don't have data around it, but I feel like the return on investment is exponential, because then when they go code review, if we just keep that standard up, it's going to be in the user's best interest. And that's, it's a little bit of a cost, and it can feel like a grind. And some people don't want to do code review, and because there's a soft skill to it. And I think that's fair. I think it's good for everyone to keep. It's a skill that everyone should be trying to get better at. But if someone doesn't want to spend all their time code reviewing, should be totally fine. I think some people, they are probably really bent towards, they really like doing code review because they really like mentoring. They like seeing all the different problems come across their desk.
Right.
And man, if you can just give them time to do what they do really well, they may not be necessarily shipping a lot of deliverables themselves, but they're helping everybody ship deliverables a lot faster or whatever. So it's a cross-cutting booster, and it does pay off. Just like, I think if you look on paper, pair programming looks like it won't pay off, because it's like, hey, these two heads are both using just one computer.
Right.
Why aren't two heads using two computers? But special things happen when you collaborate like that.
Totally. I just want to point out, because this was the question I had later on, is like the mindset you go into a code review, being a reviewer or reviewee, and you answer the question multiple times in different ways. It's like, the beautiful thing about a code review is assuming that you know something I don't, and vice versa, so that we can both improve implementation and learn. So I just wanted to touch on that, because I think that's really valuable to point out. Something that you started doing that really changed the code review process for me, and this piggybacks on what you just said, is like, you are reviewing my code, maybe you see an implementation change. Communicating implementation changes via words is really difficult and often causes churn, frustration, all these other things. So you started submitting patches. Can you talk about why you do that, why you started doing that, and kind of the benefit of that?
Yeah, you kind of answered it too. And I don't know. I haven't put too much thought into figuring out explicitly why, but it's so much easier to have a conversation when it's about something explicit. When we're just saying, hey, we should change this to be like this. And sometimes that I I may be assuming, oh, I mean these lines, but not these lines. But all those assumptions aren't actually there. When you actually say, I would expect, like, here's the suggestion, and you do it in the form of a patch of these are the code changes. I haven't tested this. Like, what do you think? Like that, we're actually evolving the thing. We're actually talking about the code and we're evolving the thing. And it just removes so much. It's like a picture says 1,000 words, code says 1,000 words of, and so yeah, I always try to communicate suggestions with patches because it eliminates so much miscommunication and misunderstanding of um, it's but it does take a little bit of time, but I think in the overall it helps cut down on the MR cycle so that we can move through. And I personally try to tweak my local environment so I can make these patches as quickly as possible. And yeah, the communicating suggestions with actual code patches, and that's huge too. If I'm saying, hey, our test should be like this, let me actually try it out locally
Yeah.
and see, run the test locally. And it's like, well, does it
Right.
still run if I do this?
Right.
Otherwise, I've wasted a day or two of us going back and forth of like, our test should be like this. And you're like, oh, well, I tried it out and it doesn't work. I'm like, what do you mean it doesn't work? And then you're like, try it out. And then I try it out and it doesn't work. Like the number of times we run into that is it's worth putting in a little bit of extra time of make the change locally, try it out. If you don't have time to try it out, just make it locally and communicate the suggestion in code is huge.
Totally. That it brings up a lot of really interesting points. One that stands out is that really being cognizant of time spent and return on investment of resources being us, and the result of that is will make the code review process better, right? Because you're using problem solving and improving the skill of code reviewing to save time, which improves quality, churn, etc. And the other thing I wanted to say with and I'll link it below. I read you had a blog post about conventional comments, right?
Yeah. It has its own site. It's a very humble site,
Awesome.
conventionalcomments.org.
Awesome.
And it just highlights it's something that some people do naturally, and even in speech will do it naturally of just say, here's a suggestion.
Right.
We talk. Right. But this is emphasizing that keeping this as a standard is really promotes us even writing the content differently. And so conventionalcomments.org is a nice little communication hack, which I think has some I've personally experienced some profound effects with me shaping the message and profound effects with others receiving the message. So awesome. Conventional comments is cool. That's the communication practice I encourage.
Awesome. Yeah, what I wanted to say about that with patches is what I appreciate when we're reviewing together, you take the time to make sure that the patch actually works. Do you know how much time is wasted when someone gives you a code suggestion that doesn't work? It's frustrating. It's a waste of time. Or at least use a conventional comment and be like non-working example so that I'm not going to go,
Yep. Because then if I just say, oh, here, change it to like this, and you didn't know that I haven't tested it.
Totally.
You're now stuck with solving, how come this worked on their machine? And now, did it even work on their machine? Like there's all of those when over communication is huge. Is It's really nice to over communicate, but it can also create a lot of noise and fatigue. With labels, you can with labels you can over communicate in a way that reduces the noise and does
Right.
not create as much
Right.
fatigue.
Right.
But
Right.
yeah,
You're not.
and I don't expect engineers to be really great at writing,
Sure.
at communicating, and so giving a pattern for like, here's just how
Yeah.
we can decorate a comment, uh, was kind of the intent as well. Of like, I don't expect everyone to have great soft skills.
Awesome.
That should be fine.
No, totally.
We're
That's
engineers.
that's great. Yeah, no, that's great. No, that's awesome point. It makes, since adopting the conventional comment, which I think most people at GitLab have kind of organically, it makes the review process way more clear, because then you can, the context switching's much less, and you have a clear thought pattern. Like, question, why is this here? Question, did you think of that? Also, from the reading perspective, on when someone gives you a review, you can immediately, you see, oh, question, I need to go into like explanation mode. Oh, suggestion, I need to go into, is that suggestion going to break anything else, or is it going to affect some, right?
Yeah.
It keeps your mind moving with purpose,
Yeah.
which I really
Or
enjoy.
and one of the labels too is praise, and that's a huge deal.
Yeah, that, thank you for bringing that up.
Of
Yeah.
being prompted to, I've left, and helps too. Before I've submitted a review, I've left a bunch of comments, realizing, oh, I left 3 questions, a suggestion, and an issue. Like, maybe there's some, maybe there's something I really appreciate about this merge request, which I hadn't highlighted, and let's just pepper the whole conversation with, here's something that was really cool, let's keep doing this thing, or this I wasn't expecting, it was really nice to see. Like, so it's a nice little conversation hack, to where I don't really think about how I'm going to word my comments. I just know these are the type of comments I'm going to leave.
Yeah.
And it's been pretty effective for me personally.
Awesome. Cool. I want to be, oh, so go ahead.
I want to be conscious of your time. I do have
Oh, yeah, no.
You asked a question a while ago.
Yeah.
About expectation or attitudes coming into a merge request review. I didn't know if you had any other questions you wanted to bring up. I know that I want to be respectful of our time, but I did really want to pick on that one. Do you have another question that you wanted to hop on?
No, we can finish with this. This is perfect.
So I think at GitLab we have maintainers, and not every organization is going to be organized this way, but every MR that has to go through, every MR that's going to get merged has to be approved by a maintainer. Like, if it's a front end piece of code, it has to be approved by a front end maintainer. It's back end code, it's got to be approved by a back end maintainer. Lots of open source projects do this. Some organizations don't do this, and that's what I want to emphasize, is that's fine. I think code review is a much better collaboration process than an approval process. And if the culture of code review is, here's my humble offerings to the maintainer, please accept it, you've totally broken that. I'm thinking you have things that I'm not aware of, I have things that you may not be aware of, let's collaborate. And it's more of like, we expect our maintainers to know everything, which is unlikely. And our MRs that we're creating, the whole review process culture isn't about collaborating towards a better solution. It's about, what's going to help me get this out the door so that it's approved and checked.
Right.
And keeping the culture of MR reviews is about collaboration is huge. It's not about, I just got to get this approval. Even though a lot of them, a lot of our tools have approvals based on it, and there's a lot of good reasons why it does need to be approved. Maintainers are a group of people that tend to have the most knowledge about how things can break and things we need to be aware of. But at the end of the day, the culture has to be, we're both collaborating on making this better. And that makes a really good maintainer of, you're not trying to appease me. I want to help you and ourselves be the most successful we can. And that's, I think, a huge culture about code reviews. It's collaborative, not about this bureaucratic approval process.
Right. No, that's, thank you for bringing that up. That, like you said, can really ruin the dynamic, and it'll just shut down the whole benefit of even doing it. To wrap up, where can people find you, follow you, anything you want to promote?
Ask a really good question. So I'm fairly incognito, but you
Okay.
will my tag name across my hacker name is Soul Design, SOULDZIN. So if you go to souldesign.com, or you go to conventionalcommons.org, you'll have a link to me there or something. But my Twitter handle is Soul Design, but it's spelled wrong from when I was a kid. I thought it was so cool. So SOULDZIN.
Awesome.
That's it.
Spelled wrong on purpose.
Oh yeah, because that's, that was what was in those that, and adding like a bunch of X's to your name.
Well, now you have to do that because everyone probably already has your name.
Yep. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for speaking to me. I have like 8 more topics I want to talk to you about.
So I always love chatting with you, Scott, and thanks for putting this together and prompting me to I mull these things over in my head, and I appreciate you organize this so I can have be prompted to put more explicit words to some of the feelings, thoughts and feelings I have. But yeah, thanks, Scott. This is awesome.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.
All right. Take care, man.
Yeah.
Bye.